You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
All right, are we ready?
Yeah,
let's
ready
try it here.
Whenever you are.
All right, Longstreet at Gettysburg, a critical reassessment. Okay.
A towel.
It's a blanket. Blanket. Okay, here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. We have Cory Pfarr with us. Cory Pfarr wrote a book called Longstreet at Gettysburg, A Critical Reassessment. And Cory Pfarr is joined by Abigail, who is pointing at a blanket, calling it a towel. Hello, Cory. How are you?
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm glad you did this.
Yep.
So your book, Longstreet at Gettysburg, A Critical Reassessment. First of all, let's talk about you for a minute. What got you into the Civil War or Longstreet, or what made you decide to write this book?
So it goes a pretty long ways back for me at this point, even to age 4 or 5 when I started taking trips to Gettysburg Battlefield and Antietam Battlefield and other battlefields down in Virginia. Mm-hmm. So several very memorable battlefield visits when I was young. Also the Gettysburg movie, I would say, came out in the early 90s, 93.
For all of us, yeah.
Yep. So, 90, 94, 95, and throughout the 90s, watching that pretty consistently, pretty constantly.
Yeah.
So I got inspiration from that. And then as it relates to General Longstreet, obviously, the movie kind of precipitated my looking into the wealth of scholarship on the Battle of Gettysburg. So I was reading a lot of the secondary sources throughout the 90s, and I kept seeing the same kind of point of view, the same kind of interpretation when it comes to Longstreet's performance at Gettysburg, and it was usually a quite negative interpretation of his role there,
laying the blame on him for everything.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
Even children's books and
really
young adult books. Yeah, I was very much into. I remember getting at, I guess it was at the Visitor Center. One of the early visits to the Gettysburg Battlefield, I got Long Road to Gettysburg.
Right.
And just recently, I looked back at what was said about Longstreet and in the book, which was published, I think, in the early 90s. And it was, all the usual. Longstreet dragged his feet. Longstreet was insubordinate. Longstreet was late. Longstreet was pouting.
Right.
And that. But coupled with that, throughout the 1990s, I also started getting into actually just reading the primary source record as well at a young age.
Really? So as a young man, you're like, oh, let me see what they were
exactly
saying.
Yeah, the after battle reports, the memoirs. I read as many of the after battle reports as I could, even at a young age, and even getting into not only Longstreet's memoirs from Manassas Step-O-Matics, but a lot of E.P. Alexander's writings. So his Fighting for the Confederacy came out there in the late 90s. I think the edited version by Gary Gallagher came out around that time, and also his other later memoirs, Military Memoirs of a Confederate. So and others. So and I was kind of trying to compare what I was seeing in the secondary sources with the primary sources, and I was seeing a significant gap. I wasn't really seeing the same thing that historians, I guess, were seeing and writing about in their secondary accounts of the battle, and perhaps were leaving out some of the primary source record. From their narratives of the battle. At the time, I was kind of trying to figure out why that was the case. Why were they leaving out certain things that E.P. Alexander was writing that discounted their interpretation? Why were they leaving out pretty much all of Lafayette and McClall's post-war writings in many cases?
And so why were they doing it?
I think there's really a leftover residue of what came out of the post-war years in several ex-Confederate officers' attacks on Longstreet in the post-war years after Lee's death. Mm-hmm. Now, it's significant that they started this after Lee's death. And even Longstreet made this case in all of his writings, and not only his memoirs, but his battles and leaders accounts, his Annals of the War, you can find in the Annals of the War book, that he believed that if Lee was alive when these ex-Confederate officers were making allegations against Longstreet's performance at Gettysburg, and negative allegations, that if Lee was around, Lee would have come to his defense. Right. I think that historians, unfortunately, I think in many cases, have sort of fallen into the trap of trusting a lot of the most agenda-driven, biased writings of the post-war years, and they've fashioned their narratives using that post-war primary source record. And I think that several of these historians hail from Virginia. Mm-hmm. And as I'm sure you're aware, Lee and Stonewall Jackson, to a certain extent, were kind of fashioned into marble men.
Yeah.
So to speak, in the post-war years.
Right.
And Longstreet was not a Virginian. Right. Also, Longstreet became a post-war Republican. Longstreet also urged reconciliation in the post-war years. Longstreet also supported, at least to a limited extent, black suffrage in the South in the post-war years. None of these gentlemen liked any of these things. Longstreet also contributed to William Swinton's 1866 book, Campaigns of the Army of the Potomac, in which he was interviewed. Longstreet was interviewed for this book. And he sort of expressed some of his, some things that he suggested to Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg, questioning Lee's judgment in certain aspects of the battle. So that was published in the late 1860s. So when Lee passed away, William Pendleton and Jubal Early thought it was time to find a scapegoat for the Battle of Gettysburg. You have this post-war Republican. You have someone who questioned Lee's judgment publicly, just after the war ended in 1866, 1867. Who better than James Longstreet to hoist the blame of the Battle of Gettysburg on? And you had 30 years of, initially it was the bogus Sunrise attack. That was their first salvo.
Right.
And when that was totally debunked, they went on to, Longstreet dragged his feet on the evening of the first day, throughout the second day, and even on the morning of the third day. So they kind of toned it back a bit, but they kept the attacks up until even after Longstreet's death. John B. Gordon was writing about it after Longstreet's death in 1904.
We love to have someone to blame.
Yep.
Like, we can't accept that Lee lost or that Meade won.
Exactly.
It has to be something went wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And
we're that way with everything. You look at, yesterday was the anniversary of JFK's death.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to get into JFK, but to me, I went from conspiracy theorist on that to, let me look at all the evidence. And I'm like, you know what? No, I think Oswald did do it. I think he was zeroing in, and that's how he got lucky on the third shot.
Right.
All those shots beforehand were misses. He was aiming for the head the whole time. Yeah. That's what I think now, right? But we can't let the conspiracy theories go, because how could this little weasel take out the most powerful man in the world? We can't believe that.
Right.
How can the great General Lee lose?
Yes.
And so we have to blame somebody. Well, let's blame Longstreet because he's a Republican now, and he thinks we should reconcile with our former enemies. And it makes sense.
Yeah, and even more importantly, how could Robert E. Lee lose at what these ex-Confederates considered to be the most important battle of the war?
Right.
The high tide for the Confederacy. Yeah. So
it's got to be sabotage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then, what made you decide that you wanted to write a book kind of exonerating him from all of these accusations?
It was a long time coming. So kind of what I described before, with delving into the secondary sources and the primary sources, I was seeing a large disconnect. And coupled with that, it was kind of surprising to me, but no one ever wrote a book on Longstreet at Gettysburg. I mean, specifically. A full-length book. Now, there have been other books, Glenn Tucker's 1968 Lee and Longstreet at Gettysburg covered a lot of this territory, but I don't think as comprehensively as sort of I tried to in my book. And other evidence has kind of come to light since then. So in the primary source record. So I felt the need that to write the book. I felt there was a significant gap there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written the book if I thought it was the same old and what authors in the past had said. So I felt it was time to cover the topic in full.
And I mean, you're a young guy. How old are you?
I'm 30.
You're 30.
I'm 30 years old.
And so now you've been today and last weekend, you were at the Visitor Center signing copies of the book. Yep. How did you become such an overnight success at such a young age?
I have to give the credit to the topic, really. I think that this topic, and especially a more favorable view of Longstreet's performance at Gettysburg, I think people have been craving it.
Yeah.
For decades now.
And there seems to be
I really do.
Yeah, there seems to be a groundswell of people saying, "Hey, now wait a minute. Longstreet wasn't so bad."
Yeah.
You guys are giving him a bad rap and yeah.
Yeah, and I mean I don't want to make it seem and I've said this before, Longstreet was not perfect either. Sure. So I'm not here to say that either. But I'm also here to say that Robert E. Lee was not perfect.
What?
Careful. Yeah.
Careful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Robert E. Lee was not. No general is perfect.
No human being is.
Longstreet made mistakes. So
yeah.
I'm not that guy either. So.
So, okay. So then let's get into some of the stuff. We're going to go from the Gettysburg campaign. We're going to start back in Fredericksburg, and then we're going to get all the way up through the end of the campaign. But we're going to focus on what the controversies are, and then you're going to debunk some of them. And this is kind of what your book is about, right?
Yes.
So we're not going to give away everything. You still have to go out and read the book because there's a lot more in there that we're not going to cover, and there's far more details that Cory's just not going to remember to put in here, and we don't have the time. So you're going to have to buy the book, which you can get at Amazon, you can get at the bookstore, at the Visitor Center. I've seen it around town in a couple places. Okay, so then let's talk now. They're at Fredericksburg. They have a little chat. Lee says, "James, we're going north." And James says what?
Well, initially, Longstreet actually, he wanted to take at least some of his divisions west. Mm-hmm. So he proposed what's since been called his Kentucky Invasion Plan, where he would join with several Western Confederate armies and sort of go after William Rosecrans' army and get into Kentucky and Ohio.
When Lee was in Richmond trying to get the blessing to go north, yep. Weren't there some people in Jefferson Davis's cabinet that wanted him to send some of his army west as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there was. That's correct.
Okay. Who was that? Do you remember the name?
I don't recall. I think it was the Secretary of War.
Okay. Well, I'll cut that part out.
Yeah. It's all right. No worries.
Okay, cool. Because it's a pain to keep cutting things out.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, so go ahead. So he wants to take people west.
Yes. So that was Longstreet's proposal. Lee was not a big fan. Lee did not want to divide his army. And also Lee felt that it was there was some kind of strategic victory that could be gained by going north again into Pennsylvania. Initially, the objective was up towards Harrisburg.
Okay.
So in subsequent discussions over the course of these 2 or 3 days in Fredericksburg, Virginia, Lee and Longstreet start to get into a discussion about what kind of tactics they want to employ in a general battle when they go north. And Longstreet, essentially they discuss past battles. They discuss Second Manassas, they discuss Fredericksburg, discuss what happened at Chancellorsville, and they come to an agreement that essentially those were fruitless victories. They were victories. Some of them were great victories, but strategically, they really bore no fruit for the Confederacy. So Lee and Longstreet kind of agreed upon a general principle for the campaign, that they not only were going north to look for a significant strategic victory, to outgeneral the Federals to achieve a significant victory, but they would also employ the tactical defensive.
Okay.
Because for far too many times, I mean, you can look back even to as far back as the 7 Days Campaign when Longstreet was with Lee. You can look at Chancellorsville. You can look at many of the battles that Lee and Longstreet fought together, and then they often turned into slugfests. And subsequent to Gettysburg, during the Overland Campaign, you had the same kind of thing. These battles often turn into slugfests. So Longstreet was more of a fan of sort of what happened at Second Manassas. You had a defensive fight, and then you had a counterstroke.
Right.
Fredericksburg, more of a defensive battle. So Longstreet and Lee came to this agreement to fight a tactical defensive when they go north as the guiding principle.
Now let me stop you there.
Yep.
Because I forget where I read this, but do we know that for sure, or do we just have Longstreet's post-war word on that?
We have more than just Longstreet's word. Well, first of all, I mean, people often talk about how biased Longstreet's memoirs are. That was one of the arguments that the ex-Confederates in the post-war years tried to make, that you can't trust Longstreet's writings. You can't trust anything he says. So that was one of their major arguments.
Okay.
And you can trust them, but you can't trust him.
Right,
Same
right.
thing. And
there's a lot of that goes around in this subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people, especially on this topic here about the tactical defensive and using the tactical offensive when they go north into Pennsylvania, Longstreet said that consistently, well before his memoirs in 1896. He said it in the 1880s, said it in the 1870s. In fact, he said it a couple weeks after the battle in a letter to his uncle Augustus. He talked about making alternate suggestions to Robert E. Lee during the battle.
And Lee agreeing to them? Because that's my next question.
Lee pushed back on them.
Okay.
And just to finish up on this point, but and not only Longstreet, we also have writings. You can look at Robert E. Lee's after battle report.
All right.
Where he talks about we did not. I'm sort of paraphrasing this, but we went north looking for a general battle, but we didn't want to get into a general battle unless attacked. He uses those two words, unless attacked.
So he agreed. So then
and you have corroborating evidence from other folks, like E.P. Alexander writes about it in both of his memoirs. He has corroborating evidence to what Longstreet says, and you also have Walter Taylor, one of Lee's staff officers, who writes in the 1870s, well before his more well-known memoirs. He essentially, I mean, if you were to take this passage out of what he wrote in the 1870s and slapped Longstreet's name on it, it would essentially be what Longstreet said regarding the guiding tactical principles for the campaign.
So then the other thing that I read, I can't remember who it was. It was, I don't know, one of the Gettysburg books I'm reading. But he said, they may have agreed to it, but Lee was really not bound to do it. Number one, to agree to it, and he didn't have to stick to it.
He did not. No.
So making that promise to Longstreet before the situation changes, I mean, it's Lee's prerogative as the commanding general to say, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, and you just used the word promise, and I see that in a lot of accounts Longstreet alleged that Lee promised that he would fight a tactical defensive, but actually he never made that claim. He never made that claim. That in my book I get into detail on that.
Okay.
That promise, that word promise, comes out of an 1868 interview that William Allen, a Lee devotee, let's just leave it at that, had with Robert E. Lee in 1868, where William Allen asked Lee, did you promise that you would not fight a general battle when you went north into Pennsylvania? Now, notice I said general battle, because that's the quote. Now, historians have taken that out of context and they've slapped this. They essentially change the question and say that they make it sound like Longstreet alleged that Lee made a promise to fight a defensive battle in the North, when that was never said, and it was never said in the William Allen source either.
You see how fake news becomes fake history? It's so easily done, right? Yeah. Wow. Okay. So go ahead.
That's in my book. I cite numerous times. I take it right out of historians' books where they misquote that interview, saying that they essentially misquote Longstreet by saying that Longstreet alleged Lee made a promise to him to fight a defensive battle. That's not the case.
See, the thing that always bothered me about the word promise is it makes Longstreet sound like an 8th grade girl. You promised. Like, you know what I mean? Like he sounds like he's whining. I don't like that. Yeah, and it's not how I see him.
Yes, and that's a good point. I go into that in one of the first chapters of the book as well, because I know that historians do talk about how Longstreet in his post-war accounts kind of sounds egotistical in some of the language that he uses.
Right. Self-aggrandizing.
And important to note that Longstreet used a lot of ghostwriters in the post-war years.
That is
Joel Chandler Harris and others wrote, essentially came up with a lot of the language for these post-war accounts. And I'm not saying that Longstreet didn't have a hand in it, but some of the verbiage, I would take a look at it, probably came from a ghostwriter.
But he's still got to put his name on it.
Sure.
So he must have read it. I mean, if he's smart, he read it.
Yes.
So
yes,
he approves of the language.
Yeah.
So
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well. All right. So there's another reason to get the book. Lee. Okay. So day one. Let's get to day one of the Battle of Gettysburg. He's criticized for being slow.
Yes.
Deliberately slow getting to the battlefield.
Yes.
But anyone who reads, a minor work on the battle will know why he was slow. Why was he slow?
You don't know how many times over the years I've seen people quote James Power Smith 1905 account where finally Lee joins James Power Smith, which is one of Ewell's aides, and several other officers, and they're deciding on if they want to follow up their success west and north of town. The Federals have now fallen back to the Cemetery Hill position, and they're deciding on if they want to follow up the attack and attack Cemetery Hill. Mm-hmm. And Ewell and some of his division commanders essentially say, we may be able to follow up the attack, but we need support from A.P. Hill's corps. And there were divisions on hand there to potentially support an attack on Cemetery Hill from A.P. Hill's corps. Lee, in this account from James Power Smith, allegedly then turns to Longstreet, who had ridden ahead of his divisions at this time. His divisions were still back on the Chambersburg Pike. And he turns to him and says, essentially says, are your divisions available? Are they ready and up? And Longstreet says, no, they're several miles back there. He points in their direction, and he sees a dust cloud. But he does say, I can push two of the leading brigades up as quickly as possible if needed.
Oh, that doesn't sound like a deliberately slow person to me. And
the main point here is to talk about the state of the Chambersburg Pike on July 1st.
Okay.
So actually, Lee and Longstreet in the very early morning hours of July 1st are riding together along the Chambersburg Pike. And once they get to Greenwood, they notice that there is a column of infantry and a wagon train coming down from the north. And that's Johnston's division of Ewell's Corps. That's Johnston's division. And so they essentially smash into Longstreet's divisions, who are coming from west to east. Lee then tells Longstreet to give Johnston's division and the 14-mile long wagon train the right of way. So there you get your delay.
Yeah, so because Ewell's already up and Johnston's division belongs to Ewell. So is that he wants that corps to be together?
Yes, he wants them to concentrate quicker because he realizes that Ewell is already engaged or will be engaged soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so Longstreet waits. So and it's with Lee's order.
Consent. Yes.
I mean, Lee says wait.
So fast forward again to that James Power Smith account. Now, why are historians making conjecture and saying, "Oh, that is a rebuke of Longstreet"? That is Lee saying that Longstreet is slow.
Oh, God.
They're making that connection. In other words,
Lee's saying, you're already slow, James, so just relax and we'll take care of it.
Yes, he says, I regret that my people are not up. That's what Lee says. And historians have used that to make their point that Longstreet was slow to reach the field on the evening of July 1st.
Wow.
When there's a very simple explanation for why he did not get there on July 1st.
It sounds so unfair. Poor Longstreet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of feel for the guy, you know? All right. So then the rest of the day, is there anything that they criticize him for on day one? I mean, because he's not engaged that day. So, I mean, does he have any other criticisms that they lay on him for day one?
Well, I mean, they talk about day one and Longstreet's initial suggestion to Lee when Lee and Longstreet finally meet on the evening of July 1st, when both of the generals are there. And Longstreet makes the suggestion, we have the Federals where we want them. All we have to do is file off the Federal right flank, get between Washington and Baltimore and the Federal Army, and we have them where we want them, in line with what we discussed before about a strategic victory.
And this is not unreasonable for him to do at this point in time.
Right. And they have this kind of relationship. Thomas Cory talks about in his memoirs about how Longstreet has a very suggestive mind. And he says this, the direct quote, none of the other lieutenant generals have this. And
then maybe that would be why Lee called him his warhorse.
Yes.
Because,
and they had a very close personal relationship, and Lee did appreciate. I mean, I think it's shown.
I read somewhere that he preferred to put his tent by Longstreet's headquarters as opposed to Jackson's, because Jackson was too pious and it was too boring.
Well, they also say that he pitches his tent next to Longstreet because Longstreet is so slow. That's the usual.
What does that mean? I don't understand that. Why would you do that?
He has to be with Longstreet to hurry him up.
So
there's that. Yeah.
I don't buy that either. God.
Yeah.
So okay. So then the second day, let's get this, because this is a big day for Longstreet.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. What is the sunrise attack theory and why is it nonsense?
So the sunrise attack theory popped up soon after Robert E. Lee's death in 1870. In the early 1870s, William Pendleton, supported by Jubal Early, alleged that Lee ordered Longstreet to attack at daylight on July 2nd. There is absolutely no evidence for this anywhere.
What do they cite as their evidence for that allegation, though? I mean, they got to have something, right? Or are they just throwing that out there?
They're throwing it out there.
Really?
They were throwing it out there.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the key here is that in the 1870s, in the mid 1870s, you had several other ex-Confederate officers who were who wrote letters to Longstreet. Sorry, I'm a little distracted by Abigail here.
That's fine. She doesn't like the story.
Yeah. So you had several other ex-Confederate officers who wrote to Longstreet in the 1870s, and these letters are included in Longstreet's Memoirs.
Okay.
In his 1896 memoirs, they're published.
All right.
And they are from Charles Venable, Charles Marshall, Walter Taylor, John Fairfax. Several of those are Lee's staff officers, and they said they have no idea. Essentially, they say they have no idea what Early and Pendleton are talking about. They were not aware of any orders for an attack at daylight.
And some of those guys might have been the ones to write the orders, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They would have been aware of them.
Right. Exactly.
And even taking this further to boot is that several of these gentlemen would criticize Longstreet in the post-war years as well. They were lost cause members, but they were supporting, and they were fair to Longstreet on this point because they realized how outlandish of a claim it was.
Okay, so then when Lee actually does issue his orders,
yep.
What time is that order issued?
So
and wait,
yes.
What time and where is Longstreet when it's issued? Where's the Corps?
Yes. So Lee does not issue any attack orders to Longstreet until 11 a.m. on July 2nd.
All right. So let's think about this for a second. 11 a.m.
Yep.
July 2nd.
Yes.
Now he wants what does the order say?
The orders are to attack up the Emmitsburg Road.
Okay. So in order to do that, where is Longstreet when the orders are received? Where's the first Corps, I should say?
The first Corps is up on what is now Hare Ridge Road.
Ridge Road.
Yeah.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's just give you, for those of you who aren't sitting there with a map of Gettysburg in front of you and who don't have it memorized in your mind, center of town, you go to the west, and then you can go northwest on the Chambersburg Pike, or you can go a little more, I don't know, to due west. I have to look at it, but on the Fairfield Road, and Hers Ridge is going to be the basically second set of ridges after or the first set of ridges after Seminary Ridge, or the first ridge after Seminary Ridge. Now, Lee wants him to attack, where did you say? Up the Emmitsburg Road.
Up the Emmitsburg Road.
Up the Emmitsburg Road. The Emmitsburg Road terminates on the southern end of town. Okay, so we're northwestish of town, and the Emmitsburg Road to attack up it implies at least you're going north. So that means he's got to go from northwest of town all the way south of town.
Yep.
And
concealed.
Right. You can't just go, excuse me, guys, we just got to get in position to attack you. You have to surprise them. You can't just, you can't let them know that you're coming there. So 11 a.m. and now he's got to move. How many men does he have on the field at this point?
2 divisions.
2 divisions.
Yeah,
so 2/3 of his corps,
yep,
which is about how many men? 20,000-ish?
Yeah.
No, the full corps, I mean, is about what?
Yeah, it's in the 20 to 30. Yeah. Yep.
All right. So 2/3 of that he's got with him. Pickett is not here yet.
Yeah,
Where's Pickett?
Pickett's back in Chambersburg. He's making his way.
What's he doing there?
He's essentially protecting the Army's trains.
Because someone is where?
Stewart is not there. Okay. Well, that's a recurring problem.
All right. So Longstreet. So that's okay. That's the first part I want to get across there is that he's got a long distance to cover.
Yep.
It's 11 a.m. when he gets the order.
Yep. What
happens after he receives the order?
He realizes that he does not have 1/8 of his attacking force yet.
Who is that?
So that's Evander Law's brigade.
Okay.
Who's in New Guilford. He was 24 miles away.
It's basically right by Chambersburg, isn't it?
Yeah.
New Guilford? Yeah.
Yeah. So forced march gets there around 11:45. The key point to make with the Law's brigade controversy is that Longstreet explicitly asked Lee to wait for Law's brigade. Lee gave Longstreet his permission to wait for Law's brigade.
Okay. So, and this is at, what'd you say? What time?
This is 11 a.m. when he asked it.
No, so he asked it as soon as he gets the order.
Yes.
And when does Law's brigade arrive?
Usually historians in the primary source record suggests around 11:45, 12 noon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then realistically, the Corps doesn't get moving until when?
Probably sometime between 12 and 1, because you still have this little problem, and it has to do with the fact that Lee wants this concealed route to the right.
Okay.
So Lee has several reconnaissance missions ongoing. The primary one is led by Captain Samuel Johnston again, who led the early morning misleading reconnaissance mission.
Let's go back to that.
Yes.
We're kind of jumping around here on time.
Sorry.
It's my fault. I'm sorry. But let's do this. So Johnston does this reconnaissance.
Yes.
Where does he go?
He claims that he got up to the summit of Little Round Top, essentially.
Now,
or it was called Round Top at the time.
And this would have been in the wee early
morning hours
of July 2nd.
Correct.
Who was on Little Round Top at that point?
Well, you had Geary up there.
Geary's men were up there.
Geary's men were up there. Buford was out in the peach orchard.
Buford was in between.
Sickles was coming up around the early morning, mid-morning hours, the 8 a.m., 9 a.m. hour. There's plenty of federal activity. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, so it's amazing that he got up to Little Round Top and nobody saw him. Nobody heard him.
Yeah,
nothing.
And he comes back to Lee around 7:30 a.m., 8 a.m., somewhere around there, and claims that he saw no federal troops south of Cemetery Hill. And that precipitates Lee's orders where he says, let's attack up the Emmetsburg Road.
Right.
Which shows you where Lee's objective is. He's going for Cemetery Hill.
So he's thinking that the Union left is at where?
Somewhere around just north of where the angle is currently.
Just north of the angle?
Yeah, somewhere around the angle. In that
little
vicinity.
South of it?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so, maybe let's, for people who, for their sake, maybe the Pennsylvania Memorial.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Like in that area.
Yeah.
Somewhere a little north of that, maybe.
Potentially.
Okay.
Potentially.
So he that's where he wants them to attack. But what happens when, so first of all, now let's fast forward.
Yep.
Okay. The order is issued. That's where I want you to attack. Longstreet's got to do this march.
Yep.
Under concealment.
Yes.
So where does he go? Where does the counter march go? Or the march, the march go?
Yeah, the march goes down, I guess the directionality would be southwest from southwest along Hare's Ridge, and it gets to what was described as an elevated point at Black Horse Tavern.
Okay.
Very close to Black Horse Tavern.
Is it Bream's Hill? Is that the name of it?
Not sure what the hill has a name.
Black Horse Tavern.
Yeah, it was an elevated point. That's how it was described.
Yeah, I think it has a name. I want to say it's Bream's Hill, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but go ahead. I'll cut this out.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I don't want to look like an idiot, so I'll cut it out.
So really one of the key arguments here that I make is that, and it is corroborated by Lafayette McClaw's post-war writings, which, as I said in the beginning, have been left out largely from the scholarship on Gettysburg. He goes into great detail about how Samuel Johnston was ordered by Lee to not only conduct this concealed this reconnaissance to find a concealed route, but he also was ordered to guide and direct Longstreet's column to their attack jump-off points on what would turn out to be Warfield Ridge.
So he's got to guide the column in daylight the way he went in darkness.
Samuel Johnston conducted multiple reconnaissance missions on the morning of the second day.
Oh, okay.
So you had the first one, as we talked about, which was to essentially figure out the fundamental position of the Federal Army, and we talked about that. He said it was the left was essentially rested on Cemetery Hill or close near Cemetery Hill. Johnston led additional reconnaissance missions in the morning hours. One of which, as I just was talking about, was to find a concealed route for Longstreet's column to the extreme right. Now, he obviously didn't find it, or he led them down a wrong path, or
he found it but didn't realize the one flaw in it until it was exposed.
Potentially.
I mean, are we saying, when you say in the morning, are you saying darkness morning or post sunup?
Post sunup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The concealed route reconnaissance was ongoing until at least if you look at William Pendleton's account, his after battle report, and you look at Lafayette McLaw's post-war writings, it could be as late as noon, 12:30. McLaw's puts it at 1 o'clock when Johnston comes back and says he's ready to conduct the column to the right.
Okay, so Longstreet gets moving, and then they discover around the Black Horse Tavern that oh boy, we're exposed. So what does he do? Because I know this is another part where the people who like to say he dragged his heels, this is him pouting,
right?
Kind of like, and what does he do with the column?
Yeah, so the column gets to Black Horse Tavern. McLaw's and Johnston are in the lead. McLaw's and even McLaw says at some point that they're riding 200 yards ahead of the column. So they get there first, and they realize that this is an elevated position. They'd be seen by signalmen on Little Round Top. By the way, Gilbert Moxley Sorrell notes in his memoirs that the Confederate column was already signaled multiple times before they even reached Black Horse Tavern. So
how does he know
it's a moot point.
He knows this because he was like after the war. He doesn't know this at the time, does he?
Yeah, he claims it in his memoirs. Gilbert Moxley Sorrell, which is a staff officer for Longstreet.
Right. But was he using the ORs or what was he using as for his memoir? Like, was he? Because I know some guys wrote memoirs, but they had access to the other side's.
That was his claim. So that was, I guess, his observation at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Okay.
He included it in his memoirs.
Okay.
But he made the claim that the column was signaled several times before it even made it to Black Horse Tavern.
Okay.
So,
got it.
Yeah, this is very complex, as you can tell. There's you got to really peel back the onion here. Mm-hmm. But Johnston and McLaws get there first. They're at the head of the column. Longstreet rides along at the middle of the column throughout the march, and initially with Robert E. Lee.
Okay. So Lee goes
people
about
criticize
how far?
him for that. Lee only goes a short distance, maybe halfway.
Okay.
From the initial marching point where Longstreet's divisions were on Hare Ridge, what is now Hare Ridge Road, between that point and Black Horse Tavern. And people, one of the criticisms is that why is Longstreet riding at the middle of the column? First of all, it was never mandatory for a corps commander to ride at the head of a column.
Right.
Second of all, if Lee had a problem with Longstreet riding at the middle of the column, would not Lee have said something to his subordinate about why are you here? Why are you not there?
Right.
Et cetera.
And I mean, didn't Lee always tell him to stay back when a fight was on because he didn't want to lose him? Like, why would you put him at the head of the column? Or
sure. And as I said, it was never mandatory for a corps commander to be at the head of a column. Right. And thirdly, Lee ordered, by all accounts, as I said, I named the sources. Lee ordered Captain Samuel Johnston to lead the column.
Like listening to this, and then again, I don't know why I keep jumping back to JFK, but a lot of this stuff, these conspiracy theory type things, they all seem to come out of someone who does know better, presenting it to the people who don't know better as evidence of some wrongdoing. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Most people would think, the general goes in the front, because, and why wouldn't he be in the front of the column, leading the way and everything like that? But in reality, you wouldn't be at the front.
Yeah, as I said, it wasn't mandatory.
But to somebody who doesn't know that or doesn't think through,
right,
they'll be like, wow, why was he in the middle?
Yeah, well, they make that because they want to create the narrative that Longstreet was pouting over having his tactical suggestions in the very early morning hours. I mean, we're talking about hours before at this point. He was still mad about Lee not adopting his tactical suggestions. That's what we're supposed to believe.
And we're supposed to believe that he's pouting with the man that caused him to be pouting.
Exactly.
For half of the ride.
Yes.
Or half of the march, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so, and then this, let me ask you this as we go through this here. All of these things that they're claiming Longstreet did, the way he behaved.
Yep.
Is this in character or out of character for Longstreet before and after Gettysburg?
I would say it's out of.
Was he a powder?
No. I don't think there's any record of that. I mean, it's not in the primary source record. I should say.
I mean, is there anywhere else that he's been accused of pouting? Or I mean, they could have accused him for a lot of things, but I mean, is there anywhere that we know, and it's undeniable that he pouted? Or that he dragged his... I know that he made some mistakes going down the wrong roads. And,
yes, I mean, Seven Pines was kind of a...
Seven Pines.
Let's just call it a cluster. I don't think anyone really performed well there, including Joseph Johnston, the commanding general at the time.
Which you would think, if there's only 7 pine trees, it's probably easy to see. It's a joke, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, so Seven Pines, but I don't recall any allegations about him pouting there, so to speak. I know that Longstreet was not happy post Chickamauga, particularly with Braxton Bragg.
Okay.
And several of the other generals, the other direct subordinates to Braxton Bragg post Chickamauga, felt the same way
about Bragg.
Yeah. They did not have confidence. Or they expressed that they did not have confidence in Bragg. Okay. And it's funny because Longstreet actually, you can still read that Longstreet suggests that can you not send us General Lee? Can you not send us General Lee? So I mean, it makes you think, if Longstreet disagreed with Lee so much and didn't like Lee, and didn't want to be around Lee anymore, and he wanted to get west as soon as he could, why is he suggesting for Robert E. Lee to come west? Right.
And for those who don't know, Chickamauga is after
Gettysburg.
Yes,
and September 1863.
Longstreet takes his corps down there. Is the whole corps, or does he leave anybody behind?
He takes two divisions.
Two divisions.
Yeah,
so he takes 2 of his divisions down. The Battle of Chickamauga takes place. So your point is that if Lee was, he was so pissy at Lee for Gettysburg and, just mad because he broke his promise, then why would he say, can you please send him down here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But all right. So there's a lot. So there's a lot more to why he was late, though. It wasn't just this countermarch. So the countermarch. So we didn't get there. So what happens when they find out? Oh no, we're visible. What does Longstreet do?
So Lafayette McLaws and Samuel Johnston proceed to ride around the immediate vicinity to try and find some way to get around the impasse. They apparently do not find one. In the meantime, Longstreet proceeds to the front and has a conversation with Lafayette McLaws. You can still read that conversation. It's actually a pretty detailed dialogue. I have it in my book, and really essentially the decision becomes essentially McLaws suggests that he had conducted a personal reconnaissance in the morning hours, and the only real option right now is for them to proceed on to a countermarch. And with no other options presented to him, Longstreet agrees with one of his principal subordinates, his division commander McLaws, and they proceed to conduct the countermarch. McLaws wanted to be at the head of the column because it appears that the McLaws was considered to be the division that was to initiate the attack once they got to their jump-off points.
Okay, but don't they criticize Longstreet for allowing him to do it? Because I've heard people who do criticize Longstreat, and they say, well, yeah, I mean, he took the head of his column and he just snaked it back around on the tail, and instead of just about facing everybody, that takes twice as long. And you're saying, and I feel stupid for believing them. You're saying that McLaws just did it. Like he said,
McLaws was very adamant that he be at the head of the column.
So he campaigned to do it that way.
Yeah.
To Longstreet.
Yes.
And Longstreet said, okay.
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
And I think potentially you have to look at it, but most likely that was the case because McLaws was the one who was supposed to initiate the attack. McLaws was once he gets to his attack jump off points, his initial attack jump off point was actually supposed to be east of the Emmitsburg Road. And he was supposed to be the division to initiate the attack.
Right. Because they're not realizing. Because in the meantime, while all this is going on, Sickles, unbeknownst to them, has come out to the Emmitsburg Road.
Yeah, and they still think that the federal left is up further north,
right?
As we talked about. So you kind of have to keep these two things in mind. What actually happens eventually once they get there and they realize things are different. And what they're thinking up until that time, around the 3:30 p.m. hour. So amazingly, if you can imagine, McLaws' attack jump-off point, the initial plan was to have McLaws' attack jump-off point on July 2nd east of the Emmitsburg Road, which if you look at that, if you go out on the battlefield these days and you take a look at that, totally different from what ultimately came to be because of other circumstances.
I mean, basically, Longstreet's got to spend the whole day fighting just to get his launch off point.
Yeah, and you can imagine, you can probably imagine how frustrated he was at this point. When they get to Black Horse Tavern, and then now we have to countermarch, and all these other delays that came up well before that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be frustrated too because Lee promised.
Yeah,
he promised me.
Right.
Look, I got to do all this because he broke his promise.
Right. One more point. One more point, if I could make on the morning hours. One more very important reason for why the attack ultimately happened late in the day. A lot of historians seem to think that Lee was adamant and he was what's the word I'm looking for?
Insistent.
He had predetermined in the overnight hours that he was going to attack with Longstreet's corps on July 2nd, initiate the attack on the right. That's not the case. Lee was uncertain on the overnight hours and well into the morning of July 2nd as to where he wanted to initiate the July 2nd attack. And we know that because of several accounts from Ewell staff officers and some of Lee's staff officers, Charles Marshall and Charles Venable, where and also Lee goes over to speak with Ewell in person several times in the overnight hours and into the morning hours at least 2 times, where he's asking Ewell, should we initiate the attack from your front? Should we move your corps around? Should we move your corps around behind Longstreet to support an attack from there? And there's even a primary source quotation where Lee is talking with George Campbell Brown, one of Ewell's aides,
right?
And Lee admits that he potentially has not decided on fighting this battle here on July 2nd, and he may choose to move further south in line with Longstreet's suggestion to get in between Washington and the Federal Army. So there's all these ideas kind of circling around well up until the 10 a.m. hour. The reason why it takes Lee so long on the morning of July 2nd to issue Longstreet's orders at 11 a.m., as we discussed, was because he had his staff officers going over to talk to Ewell. He was going back and forth to Ewell to decide if he wanted to initiate the attack from over there or to move Ewell's corps around. He doesn't make that decision ultimately until the 9:30, 10 a.m. hour. And then he finally comes back to Longstreet and says, here's your orders at 11 a.m.
So Lee was indecisive.
Lee was indecisive on the morning of July 2nd.
And the day starts late.
Yes, it starts late.
Late in the morning.
Yes.
When the orders come, the ball gets rolling an hour and a half or so later.
Yes.
And then they have to countermarch.
Yes.
And there's something, though, that goes on with Anderson's division of A.P. Hill's Corps. What is that?
Yes, they don't actually get into position. Richard Anderson's division, who was the replacement for Pickett on the second day, because as we talked about, Pickett is back in Chambersburg and making his way to Gettysburg at this time. But
now, is he actually attached to Longstreet's Corps, or is he on his own, or under Lee, or what?
He was under A.P. Hill still.
Okay.
He was under A.P. Hill's command. But Richard Anderson was essentially given to Longstreet for Longstreet's attack, but still under the command of A.P. Hill.
Right.
They don't get into position along Seminary Ridge on what would be Longstreet's left flank until the noon hour.
Okay. So, and he's supposed, you say that he's there to replace Pickett. So meaning that he's going to act in support if where is he in relation to McLaws and Hood?
So,
or where is he supposed to be?
Ultimately, I should say, ultimately, a little Abigail.
we have a baby pushing her face against the window. I took a picture of it. Don't worry. It's on Instagram.
So ultimately, Hood is going to be on the extreme right, and you're going to have McLaws in the middle, and then you're going to have Richard Anderson to the left of McLaws.
Okay.
So the idea was, the final plan was for Hood to start the attack, and then succeedingly up the line, McLaws would go in, and then Richard Anderson would continue the attack up Seminary Ridge against Cemetery Ridge.
They call this an echelon attack?
Yes.
Is that what that's called?
So the only evidence of that, reference to that specific term, is actually in A.P. Hill's after battle report. That term, an echelon.
But it's a French term for what they're doing.
Yes, essentially that's what happened. But that's what ultimately happened. But what I was saying is that
that wasn't the plan.
It wasn't. We're going to initiate an echelon attack. That was never really.
So the way it went off was just the way it went off. It wasn't designed that way.
There's no evidence that it was designed to be an echelon attack.
Okay.
Yeah, right. There's not evidence to support that.
I'll take your word for it. You did the studying, so I will take your word for it. Okay, so then Hood's got to be shifted a little further south than where he originally goes, right?
Yep.
And so that's going to take more time. But then Hood gets shifted and he goes looking around. Doesn't he send some Texas boys out to reconnoiter the area?
He does. He sends.
Hey, I remembered that.
Yeah. So he sends some scouts over in the Round Tops area. They come back and say, "Oh, there's a potential for us to go around that way to get at the federal left flank." And they say, it's better ground. Essentially, they say it's probably better ground than what you're going to have to go through here in your front. So Hood tries to make his case several times to Longstreet through staff officers and also eventually in person with Longstreet, saying, we have this alternate option here. Longstreet consistently says Robert E. Lee's orders, the commanding general's orders, are to attack up the Emmitsburg Road.
Right.
There's at least 5 instances of this between staff officers and Longstreet himself saying Robert E. Lee's orders are to attack up the Emmitsburg Road. We must obey the orders of Robert E. Lee.
I do this under protest. So that scene in the movie, though, the people love that scene.
They do, yeah.
It's basically true.
Basically true.
Yeah,
there's some dialogue filled in there.
Sure.
Obviously, historical, movie license, I should say.
Have you ever read Hood's letter to Longstreet about that? And
yes.
I remember for the podcast, we actually got Patrick Gorman to reprise his role as Hood, reading quotes and stuff. But it's hard to find Hood quotes. Yeah. So I went to the library at the park. And they got me some, and they got this letter for me.
Yep.
And I got so excited because in the letter, he basically says, but he doesn't exactly say it this way, but he basically says, all they need to do is roll rocks down on you. And I was like, oh my God, that's where it comes from. Of course, Shara made it much more poetic than the way he said it. But, oh man, it was, So, but okay. So that's something that happened. So those of you who wonder, that was a conversation that happened. It may not have happened that way.
Yeah, probably not that way, but it's quite an accurate scene, I would say.
I mean, basically, those two men in that scene are delivering those generals' points of view. Whether or not they expressed it in that conversation, we don't really know. But whatever.
And Longstreet probably agreed with Hood, but it was way too late in the day.
Do it.
Lee was pushing through Longstreet to get the attack going, so. That's why Longstreet was very insistent with Hood that we must obey the orders of the commanding general.
And let me ask you this: you see these people, you go online, your Facebook, Instagram, or whatever, and you see these people, and they go, if only they had listened to Hood,
right? Or
if only Lee had listened to Longstreet, and they went around to the right, and I go, they would have been destroyed. That's what I think. What do you think?
One division, I mean, arguably they may not have got it. It was very late in the day at this point. I don't even know if they would have gotten online to be able to make an attack before darkness.
Or if they did,
it was one division. I mean, you're going to swing a division around back there.
Well, now, did Hood want to take just his division, or did he want the whole corps to go? Because I know Longstreet wanted the corps to go, right?
Yeah, so that's ultimately was Longstreet's proposal on the morning of July 3rd, different from his proposal on the evening of July 1st and morning of July 2nd.
Okay.
Morning of July 3rd, Longstreet makes that suggestion to take the whole corps around the Round Tops and attack the federal left and rear. But on the second day, I believe that Hood only advocates to take his division around, not to touch McClaw's.
Well, that would have been a rude awakening for him when the 6th Corps got to town, and there were, what I mean? Like,
there's so many what ifs, and I intentionally stay away from any sort of what ifs in my book. I just note what the suggestions were and sort of leave it at that. Good,
because I can't stand speculation.
I don't deal with what if stuff.
No.
So,
and anytime somebody tries to engage me online with that, I'm like, they would have lost. They still would have lost. So what do you want from me? They still would have lost. And if Ewell had taken the hill, they still would have freaking lost. I'm sorry. I have no, they would have lost. They were meant to lose. Yeah. That's the way it goes. Okay. So finally the assault takes place. Are there any criticisms of him in the handling of the assault?
So there are some, not generally. I think that most historians give him credit when it comes to the actual assault part of the day.
Okay.
It was an impressive assault.
Sure.
I mean, considering the odds that Longstreet ultimately came up against on July 2nd, because as events would turn out, Hill only Anderson's division only engaged with three brigades, not 5.
Right.
Ewell didn't attack until after Longstreet's attack had fizzled out. Really just ineffective cannonading throughout Longstreet's attack, which allowed Meade to shift troops from his right to his left against Longstreet. So you have continually reinforcements from Meade's right to his left coming up against Longstreet's 2 divisions and Richard Anderson's 3 brigades. There's really no other Confederate reinforcements coming to the aid of Longstreet on July 2nd. So what essentially happens is that Longstreet's attack is spread over such a large front that it just doesn't have the intact and depth to be able to handle the amount of reinforcements that ultimately come at Longstreet in the late afternoon and evening hours of July 2nd.
Yeah. So they have to hold. And then they basically hold along the line they would have launched the attack from anyway if there weren't any Union troops on the Emmitsburg Road, if Sickles wasn't out there. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially.
I mean, that's where they wanted to launch it off from. Because the next day they've got artillery there. And
and if you read in, as critical point there, if you read in one of Robert E. Lee's after battle reports, the desired ground was the peach orchard. He specifically talks about it as an artillery platform.
Yeah.
And then he talks about the crest of the ridge, and which means Cemetery Ridge. No discussion of Little Round Top whatsoever.
Right.
That is a point that comes up after the battle, as Little Round Top was a very strategic position. That was not really understood by the Confederates on July 2nd.
Which is amazing, because if you're looking at it from their perspective, it's like, why wouldn't you want that? Like, how do you not? But you don't really see it until you get up there and you look and you go, oh,
yeah,
that's why you want it.
Yeah. Lee had his sights on Cemetery Hill, as we talked about.
Yeah.
He thought the federal flank was just south of Cemetery Hill. He wanted to attack up the Emmitsburg Road, and they only had so much time to change the plan. Once they noticed the Sickles was out at the peach orchard, they really, only had, a half an hour to alter the plan. So,
all right. So then day 3 comes along. The night between day 2 and day 3. What are they? What is Lee thinking? Are he and Longstreet talking things through? Is Lee, what's going on? What are they thinking?
Yeah. So during the overnight hours, this notion of concert of action often comes up when people talk about the failures of. Even Lee talked about this in his after battle report and in the post-war years about a failure of concert of action.
You're talking about Ewell and and Longstreet.
Now, if you're going to have concert of action, you would think you'd get your principal subordinates together on the night of July 2nd and say, okay, we got to get everybody together here and make sure that we have proper concert of action on July 3rd. Yeah. That does not happen. Meade has a meeting, as I'm sure you know, with his principal subordinates. Lee does not have a meeting with his principal subordinate. He only meets with A.P. Hill in person.
Any idea why?
There's nothing. There's nothing there that I can offer as to explanation for that.
That was an unfair question. You're forgiven.
Yeah. So Longstreet, according to his after battle report, he's looking for a way to get at the Federals. He understands that Lee wants to resume offensive operations on July 3rd, but he's offered no specific orders.
Okay.
There's no evidence that Lee sends Longstreet specific orders on the overnight hours of July 2nd and the 3rd. So Longstreet spends the evening trying to find a way to resume offensive operations on July 3rd without engaging in another frontal assault. Essentially, that's what he talks about in his after battle report.
That's what Longstreet wants to do.
Yes.
And so what is originally Lee, doesn't Lee have a first plan?
He does, yes.
On the 3rd, what is that plan?
So he talks about in his after battle report about the battle plan being unchanged.
Okay, so basically stay the same. So resume on the left and the right.
Yes. So the initial battle plan was for McLaws and Hood, supported by George Pickett. Notice I didn't say spearheaded by George Pickett.
Interesting. Led
by Hood and McLaws, a resumption, supported by George Pickett against the Federal left center. So from the Confederate position, that would be to the right of the peach orchard. Mm-hmm. So that is kind of Lee's plan that he comes to Longstreet with on the morning of July 3rd at 4:30 a.m. And during that infamous meeting with Longstreet at 4:30 a.m., Lee comes to Longstreet with that battle plan, and Longstreet says Hood and McLaws are the Army's right flank. If they attack and are repulsed, the Federals have access to our right and rear and will essentially be crushed. And Lee says this in his after battle report, that Longstreet determined that he had been embarrassed the day before. Longstreet had been embarrassed the day before by troops Federal troops that extended further to the right. So Longstreet determined, and Lee agrees with Longstreet on the morning of July 3rd, that Hood and McLaws should not take part in the attack. So
any mention of the casualties they took? I mean, aren't they kind of beaten up?
That's another thing you could get into about why Lee essentially says that the battle is unchanged, as if the Federals are going to reciprocate and the Federal position is going to remain unchanged. So if Longstreet is to initiate an attack at daylight on July 3rd, as some historians have alleged, I think dubiously, you're going to launch an attack without examining perhaps changes in the Federal position in the overnight hours. I mean, we know not only from Longstreet, but we know from William Pendleton. We know from William Pendleton's after battle report that the Federal position was strengthening. They could hear it in the overnight hours. So to say that the battle plan is unchanged, and then for these historians to say that Longstreet was apparently given specific orders to attack at daylight, I think that's really irresponsible generalship if you're advocating for that from Lee's perspective.
And so the order wasn't actually given. It was a discussion. That was what Lee was thinking.
Yep, that was Lee's initial plan.
Okay,
yep.
So it was an order, or it was just a plan, and then he changed it.
He came to Longstreet with this order on the morning of July 3rd.
And then Longstreet looked at it and said, I don't think we should do that.
Yeah, Longstreet provided the suggestion about Hood and McLaws being the Army's right flank.
So Pickett's charge then comes along. Now, how does Pickett's charge come along? Does Longstreet say, hey, Pickett's fresh, let's shove him in the middle? Or was it something else? How did it come about?
Once Longstreet told Lee that Hood and McLaws were the Army's right flank, then Lee, by all accounts, immediately pivoted to his backup plan.
Okay.
I think we can call it that. I mean, his backup plan was essentially what ultimately occurred with the Pickett-Pettigrew-Trumbull charge.
Right.
So you're not only talking at this point cross-corps coordination. You're talking units from Longstreet's and A.P. Hill's corps. You're also talking a change of, ultimately a change of an attacking point, an attack objective, much further up Cemetery Ridge. So initially the unchanged battle plan was to, from the Confederate perspective, to the right of the Peach Orchard. Now it's moving well up Cemetery Ridge, perhaps to this Cemetery Hill area, Ziegler's Grove. It's a kind of a debate as to where Lee wanted the attack directed. There's really no specific point there.
I think Scott Hartwig not debunked, but settled that debate.
Yeah, I mean, everybody says the Copes tree and not.
Well, but there's, maybe I'm thinking of a different debate. There was a debate about whether the Copse of Trees was referring to the Copse of Trees or Ziegler's Grove.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
There's
Scott
a debate
Hartwig
there.
settled that. He settled the debate.
Okay, well, good for Scott.
Google it. You'll see what I'm talking about.
That's good. Yeah. Yep. So.
No, and he I think it was like Alexander. I think it was Alexander that he quotes. It said, "We looked at Cemetery Ridge as the hill. There was no ridge and hill. That was post battle. It was all the hill." And the Grove, I was looking at the Copse of Trees, so it's no Grove. So, yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I was saying, cross-corps coordination, and you have the attack point changed, and you have all these other plans as far as massive cannonade and bombardment prior to the charge. You have this idea of the main artillery line being advanced in support of the infantry. You have all these other elements that are going to take more time and coordination. So there's no way that Longstreet is going to be able to attack probably, before
anytime
he ultimately did around, the 2 p.m. Hour.
So it seems to me that there's a pattern developing of Lee not really knowing what he wants to do first thing in the morning, and then finally deciding what he wants to do later in the morning. And then Longstreet's got this huge task before him that he's got to put together. And naturally, it's not going to get going until early to mid-afternoon. Yet, again, those in the know are presenting this Longstreet's dragging his heels stuff, and this stuff is the evidence of, these different things are the evidence of it, but they're lying through omission, or they're just preying on the fact that the people reading don't know all these things or think all these things through or won't investigate on their own.
Right.
Like you did.
So I would essentially say once Lee and Longstreet had that early morning meeting, 4:30 a.m., that essentially sealed the deal, I would say, for an extended delay for the July 3 attack, because the plan was changed.
Right.
And as I said, cross corps, different attack point, and then Lee even says in his after battle report, the morning was occupied in necessary preparations. That's what he used, necessary preparations. And often students of the war, I guess, have this perception that Longstreet was planning everything on his own, unilaterally on July 3rd. There are so many accounts out there of Lee being with Longstreet on July 3rd, making preparations for the charge on July 3rd.
What's Hill doing? I'm sorry. Hill. Yeah. What's Hill doing at this? Like, is he just nursing his VD, or is he actually helping? Because 2/3 of the divisions are his.
So there are accounts that AP Hill was with Lee and Longstreet on the morning of July 3rd. Not early morning. We're talking at this point. We're talking about 9 a.m., 10 a.m., something like that. Yeah. There are accounts of AP Hill being with Longstreet and Lee. But as far as more detail as to
what he's doing,
AP Hill contributed as far as direction. Now there is a curious thing that AP Hill alleges, and it's that he apparently, I think he used the word begged. I begged General Lee to use my whole corps to support the July 3 attack, and Lee turned him down and said, "No, that's our reserves if the attack fails." That's a direct quote from AP Hill.
That makes sense.
So,
all right. So then he just had to sit there and wait.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's really not much primary source evidence out there that talks about kind of what AP Hill was doing on the morning of July 3rd.
Now, let's juxtapose to the movie. The movie, Longstreet says no 15,000 men, yada, yada, yada.
Sure.
From what I understand, that is something that he wrote years later, claiming that he wrote. But do we have any witnesses to this conversation? Does Lee corroborate this story at all, or what?
Well, not in Lee's after battle reports, and Lee didn't really write I don't think he wrote much about Gettysburg at all in the post-war years. I mean, he may have made a few comments if people were to ask him about Gettysburg, but so yes, we don't have corroborating evidence besides Longstreet's account on that particular quote.
Okay.
Yep.
And he seems to really kind of be reluctantly sending Pickett in to do this task and everything. And he seems to be kind of like shifting the responsibility over to this little lieutenant colonel in charge of the artillery.
Yeah, that's another allegation against Longstreet on July 3rd. Now, if we want to get into that, I would encourage everyone to read the notes between E.P. Alexander and Longstreet on the third day.
Okay.
And
where can they find them?
You can
in your book.
Well, yeah, they're in the book. They're certainly in the
all
book.
All of them?
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all in there.
So there you go. Get one book and that's it. You got all the notes. It's a one-stop shop.
So it seems to be that there's this conspiracy, as we were talking about conspiracy theory, there seems to be this conspiracy theory that Longstreet was trying to somehow transfer the blame onto E.P. Alexander's shoulders.
Well, not the blame, but the responsibility. Well, I guess then it would be the blame if it failed.
But I mean, Longstreet did this often throughout the Civil War. He had a good eye for talent. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
So I think the notes on July 3rd and his subsequent reliance on key subordinates, you can see this at the Wilderness too, and his flank attack in the Wilderness, letting essentially Gilbert Moxley Sorrell execute the follow-on flank attack in the Wilderness just before his wounding. But I think that the notes, based on what I read, is that Longstreet was essentially leaning on E.P. Alexander's trained eye and expertise on July 3rd.
Okay.
During the pre-bombardment and the bombardment and.
So he's not saying you order Pickett to go forward and take care of everything. I'm going to take a nap. He's saying I'm relying on the fact that you know what you're looking at.
Yep.
And you can judge whether your work has made way for the infantry.
Yes.
Because you've done this before.
Yes.
And you're up front. And so that makes sense. Okay, that makes more sense to me now.
Yeah. And
but you see, again, this is where you take one thing and you twist it. You put a sinister, hue over it.
Right.
And now everybody thinks that he's just trying to shift the blame. But in reality, it makes more sense if you think it through and you know more and you read more. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as responsibility goes, a lot of these authors then pivot from saying Longstreet was trying to shift the responsibility. They also concurrently say that Longstreet was looking for ways to call off the attack.
Is that true? That was my next question.
I would argue, if you take a look at E.P. Alexander's notes, and the dialogue between Longstreet and E.P. Alexander pre-July 3 attack, I think that E.P. Alexander gave Longstreet several reasons. If you take a look at the notes, to call off the attack, he talks about how this attack will not succeed without the expending. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's going to be bloody. He essentially says extremely bloody. He talks about how the smoke will obscure the entire field.
So basically everything that happens.
He talks about just prior to Pickett's advance or at the moment of Pickett's infantry steps off toward Cemetery Ridge, Longstreet rides out to Alexander, and Alexander drops 2 bombshells on him and says, we've essentially run out of ammunition. The ammunition has been moved too far to the rear. That's William Pendleton. So we essentially don't have a lot of ammunition to be able to support the charge. He also informs Longstreet that he had planned to move nine mobile howitzers out in front of Pickett's column to fire a few rounds and then let Pickett's column pass through. That was that advanced artillery plan that that Lee wanted, and Longstreet directed him to. That's also in the notes. Longstreet directing E.P. Alexander to move to ensure that artillery is moved forward with the infantry, and Alexander informs Longstreet while he's out there that Pendleton and Charles Richardson had a Third Corps artillery commander had moved those howitzers somewhere.
Right.
So Alexander essentially had this plan for advanced artillery, and William Pendleton and Richardson moved the guns. He's essentially telling Longstreet, we don't have the ammunition to support the attack sufficient, and I don't have any artillery to advance with the infantry.
Wow.
And Alexander and Longstreet are watching the infantry moving forward at this moment. I mean, he's finding this out as Pickett's going in. And this is when Longstreet says essentially to E.P. Alexander, I don't want to make this attack. I think the attack will fail. I would, if it was under my authority, I would not conduct this attack. And it wasn't something that Longstreet was hiding as far as making that statement, because he put it right in his after battle report. You can read it. But
the sense I get about Longstreet is that he may disagree with something, but once it's like basically you have no choice, this is your order, he commits to it. He does it because he doesn't want to lose. Just because it's not your idea doesn't mean you want to lose. he's not this petulant child. You know, you cut off your nose to spite your face. You're the one losing.
And if Longstreet was at that time trying to take every moment and every opportunity to go to Lee and say, we should not do this. We should not do this. Why did he not take any of these reasons that I just outlined back to Lee and say,
right,
this should not go forward. This should not go forward. He's carrying out his duty as the professional soldier he was.
Well, I mean, and okay. So Lee's thinking is they're weaker in the center. Is this true, or is this? Yeah,
that was
they're weaker in the center because they reinforced the flanks.
Yeah, that was his justification. Yep.
And Pickett's fresh. As far as they can see.
Yeah, the only fresh.
Pickett's the only fresh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, anywhere that they can see. Right? Oh, well, no, because they know the 6th Corps is there by now.
Yeah.
They've engaged with some of them.
Some of them, yeah.
In the 5th Corps.
Yeah.
But whatever. Okay. But for the most part, in that sector where Hancock's men are, those are fresh guys. Or Pickett's going to be the freshest in that area.
Yes.
Either side.
Yeah, on the Confederate side, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
on the Confederate side, but
yeah.
I mean, yeah. Okay. Essentially.
Yes.
So Longstreet must think, well, you know, it's sound thinking. And, you know, maybe part of me thinks this isn't really going to work, but these guys, they haven't, Pickett hasn't been in it yet. So they're at, you know, full strength as they were yesterday. And that's more than we can say for the other 2 divisions going in.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I do think that Longstreet understood that Lee really wanted this.
Right. And it's his commander. He's got to take the order. Yeah.
Yep.
And do it. And okay, the Battle of Gettysburg ends. Pickett's charge is a failure. Does Longstreet take off his hat and slam it on his thigh and say, damn, and then try to get on his horse and go out there and rally the men like in the movie?
That account came from his memoirs as well. So
that's what he says.
There is record of that in his memoirs.
Okay. Does Captain Cory or anyone else say, no, he did that? Yeah.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not that I know of. That was an account in Longstreet's memoirs.
So obviously,
he thought they were going to counterattack, essentially.
Right. Okay. So he's getting ready to brace.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. He's bracing. All right. So obviously, Longstreet has totally blown it for Lee. 3 days of just sabotage, heel dragging, and whining. And so Lee probably after Gettysburg, the first thing on his mind is like, okay, the first thing on his mind is let's get back into Virginia. The second thing on his mind is I got to get rid of that Longstreet. As soon as we get back down to Fredericksburg, I got to get rid of Longstreet. A, do they go back down to Fredericksburg? And B, how quickly does he get rid of Longstreet?
No, they do not. And Longstreet subsequently, soon thereafter, does go west. But there's a series of letters, and you can read
because
them.
Lee hates him. Lee's mad at him now, right? That's why he goes west. Lee's like, get him far away from me. Right? Isn't that right?
Oh, yeah.
No, is it?
No.
Oh, what? Oh, wait a second. What's the real story then?
Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, Longstreet had long advocated for sending his 2 divisions west because he thought there were strategic opportunities out there that he could help with.
Uh-huh.
Secondly, as far as the supposed allegations about some kind of strained relationship between Lee and Longstreet leading to Longstreet going out west, you can read some letters, and I have several quotations in my book that were just prior to Longstreet taking his 2 divisions down to Braxton Bragg, and he essentially says, you know, we wouldn't leave you if this was absolutely necessary, and Lee sends a letter back just after Chickamauga that says, you can't come back to me soon enough. Finish your work and return to me.
Mm-hmm. Return to me.
Yeah, return to me.
It's like a love song.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are two gentlemen, at least in their correspondence. Longstreet saying, I wouldn't be leaving you unless I thought it was absolutely necessary. You have Lee saying, come back to me as soon as possible. And Lee is not a person who hangs on to people that he doesn't like.
He's got a history of getting rid of people.
He has a history. I mean, you have D.H. Hill as an example, and you have Benjamin Huger after the 7 days. So he's not one to hold on to generals that he doesn't think are up to the task.
Right. Okay.
So to speak.
And he holds on to Longstreet till the very end.
Yes.
The bitter end.
Yes. Longstreet eventually comes back and fights with Lee at the Wilderness. He's wounded there pretty badly. And then subsequent to coming back from his wound, serves with Lee down to Appomattox. Yep.
Longstreet, isn't he the commanding officer that Custer is brought to with the flag of truce demanding the surrender of this army, and Longstreet yells at Custer?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that story.
I believe so. Yep.
Yeah. I like that. Just yelling at the little boy and his little curly blonde hair.
Yeah.
You know. All right.
I mean, even one step forward, even in post-war years, January 1866, there's a beautiful letter. I would urge everyone to read it, that Lee sends to Longstreet talking about, I wish you every success in the world. If you're as good a businessman as you were a soldier, no one, he uses the term, no one will excel you.
Huh.
No one will excel you.
Is this in the book?
This is in the book.
The whole letter?
Not the whole letter, but
second edition. You should put it the whole letter in the book. So just because then it's like, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
and end it as with that.
I think it's a great sort of counter argument. That's probably the best counter argument.
I would say. Well, because I mean they're all defending Lee by besmirching Longstreet.
Yep.
And then here's Lee's own words saying, "I love you."
Yep. Yeah. And I mean,
do they ever see each other again after the war before Lee dies, or is it just letters?
They do not. I don't believe they ever see each other in person again after Appomattox.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't believe that's the case.
That is sad.
But Longstreet does name a child after Robert E. Lee.
Oh yeah, what is he called?
Actually, when I think it was just after Chickamauga, he names him Robert Lee Longstreet.
Oh, that makes sense.
So I guess he didn't like Lee.
Yeah, right. They hated each other. Well, that's a good place to end it there. Cory Pfarr, the book is called Longstreet at Gettysburg, A Critical Reassessment. Do you have a copy in the car that I could buy off you? Come on, Cory, you got to have a box of books in the trunk at all times.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's a good point there.
Well, I'll just have to go and pick it up like every other schlub. But I suggest all you schlubs out there go and pick it up. It sounds interesting, and I can't wait to read it. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with everything with this book.
Thank you.
I hope they make it into a movie.
Yeah.
Let me just insist if they want to buy the rights, just say yes, but Matt Callery has to direct it.
All right, yeah.
There we go. All right, cool.
All right, thanks.
All right, bye, Abigail. Say bye. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.